The inexorable spread. The spread of Zero Doom was as relentless as it was silent, an invisible tide sweeping across the globe, altering the course of humanity without so much as a whisper. Unlike other viral pandemics, there were no outward signs of its presence, no fevers, no coughs, no rashes. The virus was a master of disguise, infiltrating the human genetic code with an insidious precision that rendered it undetectable by conventional means. And once it had taken root, the transformation it wrought was irreversible. Within the scientific community, a collective realization dawned, a countdown had begun. From the moment the virus infiltrated a person's genetic code, the clock ticked towards an inevitable endpoint. This endpoint, this doomsday, was not a matter of months or years, but loomed a century ahead. Zero Doom was not a swift executioner, it was a patient reaper, slowly erasing the essence of what it meant to be human. The gravity of this realization settled heavily upon the shoulders of the world's brightest minds. The initial hope of finding a cure had faded into despair as the true nature of the virus became clear. Zero Doom was not a disease to be cured, it was a force of nature, rewriting the genetic code of its hosts in a way that could not be undone. The scientific community, once united in the pursuit of a solution, now faced the grim reality that their efforts would not save those already infected. But rather than surrendering to despair, a solemn camaraderie emerged among these scientists, a shared sense of purpose that transcended the loss they felt. Their pursuit shifted from the futile endeavor of curing the virus to a more profound and enduring mission, to salvage the legacy of humanity itself. The shift in focus. In the dimly lit chambers of laboratories scattered across the globe, amidst stacks of aging tomes and the glow of computer screens, the scientists toiled ceaselessly. The sterile, controlled environments where they worked had become sanctuaries of hope. Their new mission was clear, to defy the impending oblivion by encapsulating the sum of human knowledge in a form that could endure the test of time. Books became their chosen vessels. Unlike digital media, which was vulnerable to obsolescence and decay, books offered a permanence that could withstand the ravages of time. The scientists meticulously chronicled the intricacies of science, philosophy, history, and the arts. They inscribed the blueprints of technology, the nuances of governance, and the tales of human triumphs and tribulations. Every word, every equation, every theorem, every narrative that defined humanity found its place on those pages. Dr. Ilona Grigorievna, a leading biochemist in Moscow, stood at the forefront of this effort. Her lab, once a place of cutting-edge genetic research, had been transformed into a hub for the preservation of knowledge. Shelves that had once held samples of DNA and genetic markers were now filled with stacks of handwritten manuscripts and carefully typed pages. Ilona, do you really believe this will work? Asked Dr. Sergei Volkov, her longtime colleague, as he entered the lab, his voice tinged with both hope and skepticism. Ilona looked up from her work, her expression resolute. It's not a matter of belief, Sergei. It's a matter of necessity. If we don't preserve what we know, everything we've achieved as a species will be lost forever. This may be our only chance to leave something behind for whoever, or whatever, comes after us. Sergei nodded, understanding the weight of her words. But how can we ensure that these books will survive the passage of time? Paper decays, ink fades. How do we protect it? Ilona's eyes gleamed with the spark of an idea that had been consuming her thoughts for weeks. That's where our research comes in. We've been developing a chemical compound, an elixir, if you will, that can be applied to the pages. It will act as a preservative, protecting the text from the elements, from decay, even from the passage of centuries. If we get it right, these books could last 1,000 years or more. Sergei raised an eyebrow, intrigued. 1,000 years? That's quite an ambition. It's not ambition, Sergei, Ilona replied with quiet determination. It's survival. This is our legacy. The elixir of preservation. The quest for the elixir of preservation became the scientists' raison d'etre. Across the world, laboratories that had once been dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of genetics now turned their focus to this new and critical mission. The scientists worked around the clock, sacrificing their own lifespans to create a solution that could defy the ravages of time. In a lab in Kyoto, Dr. Hiroshi Sato and his team were on the brink of a breakthrough. They had been experimenting with various chemical compounds, testing their effects on different types of paper and ink. The goal was to find a combination that would not only preserve the text, but also prevent any biological growth, such as mold or bacteria, that could degrade the material over time. "We've isolated a compound that shows promise," Hiroshi explained to his team as they gathered around a table littered with samples. "It's a synthetic polymer that forms a protective layer around the paper, shielding it from moisture and environmental damage. But it's not enough on its own. We need to combine it with a biocide that can prevent microbial growth without damaging the paper." One of his colleagues, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, nodded thoughtfully. "We could try using a combination of silver nanoparticles and the polymer. Silver has antimicrobial properties, and if we can disperse it evenly, it should provide the protection we need." Hiroshi smiled, impressed by the suggestion. "That's a good idea, Yuki. Let's run some tests and see how it holds up under different conditions. We need to be sure that this will work, not just for decades, but for centuries." The team worked tirelessly, refining their formula, testing it under extreme conditions to simulate the effects of time. They exposed the treated paper to intense heat, humidity, and ultraviolet light, watching for any signs of degradation. Every time a sample failed, they went back to the drawing board, tweaking the formula, adjusting the ratios, pushing themselves closer to their goal. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Dr. Anja Muller was leading a similar effort, but with a different approach. Her team was focused on creating a protective casing for the books themselves, something that could shield them from physical damage as well as environmental threats. "We're not just preserving paper," Anja explained to her team. "We're preserving the essence of who we are, what we've learned, and what we've created. These books will be our legacy. We need to ensure they can withstand anything the future might throw at them: floods, earthquakes, even fire." Her team experimented with various materials, from advanced composites to reinforced ceramics, seeking a balance between durability and accessibility. The casing needed to be strong enough to protect the contents, but also designed in a way that future civilizations could open and read the books without specialized tools or knowledge. As the years passed, the scientists made progress, inching closer to their goal. They knew that their names might fade into obscurity, that they would never live to see the fruits of their labor. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the legacy they would leave behind, the knowledge they would safeguard for the future. The countdown to Doomsday. As the world outside continued to unravel, the virus claimed more lives, erasing identities, and reducing civilizations to relics of the past. The countdown to the inevitable doomsday echoed like a relentless drumbeat in the consciousness of those who understood the gravity of the situation. By 2085, the last vestiges of human civilization had vanished. The once bustling cities lay silent, reclaimed by nature. The towering skyscrapers, once symbols of human achievement, were now crumbling relics, overgrown with vines and foliage. The streets, once filled with the hustle and bustle of daily life, were now empty, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. In the midst of this desolation, the halls of knowledge, libraries brimming with bound wisdom, stood as silent sentinels to a bygone era. These repositories, scattered across the globe, were the final resting places of humanity's legacy. The books within, carefully preserved and protected, waited patiently for the next dawn of civilization. One of these libraries was located deep within the Rocky Mountains, in a cavernous vault designed to withstand the test of time. The entrance was sealed with a heavy metal door, its surface etched with symbols that conveyed a warning to any future discoverers. Within these walls lies the sum of human knowledge. Preserve it, protect it, learn from it. Inside the vault, the temperature was kept at a constant, cool level, the air dry and sterile. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, each one filled with books carefully cataloged and preserved. The silence was profound, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of the knowledge contained within those pages. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, one of the last surviving members of the team responsible for this library, stood in the center of the vault, her breath visible in the cold air. She had spent the last decade of her life here, overseeing the final stages of the preservation project. Now, as the world outside crumbled, she knew her time was coming to an end. "It's all here," she whispered to herself, her voice echoing softly in the vast space. "Everything we were, everything we knew, it's all here." She walked slowly down the aisle, her fingers brushing the spines of the books. Each one represented a piece of the human story, a fragment of a civilization that had once thrived, now reduced to memories captured on paper. At the far end of the vault, she stopped in front of a large, metal case. Inside were the final volumes she had worked on, a comprehensive account of the last days of humanity. The case was sealed, the contents protected by the same chemical compound that had been developed to preserve the books. It was her final contribution, her last act of defiance against the oblivion that awaited. Elena knew that she would not live to see anyone open the case. The virus had taken its toll on her, and she could feel herself slipping away, her mind growing foggier with each passing day. But she took comfort in the knowledge that her work, like the work of all the scientists who had dedicated their lives to this mission, would endure. With a final sigh, she placed her hand on the case, closing her eyes. "I hope someone finds you," she whispered. "I hope they understand." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving the vault in silence once more. The heavy door closed behind her, sealing the library off from the world, a time capsule waiting to be discovered by a future that may never come. The waiting game. When the last of humanity disappeared, the world returned to a state of stillness, the once dominant species fading into a distant memory. The Earth, more resilient than ever, began to recover. Forests reclaimed abandoned cities, their roots breaking through the remnants of human civilization. Rivers, no longer confined by man-made barriers, carved new paths through streets once paved, and animals roamed freely where humans had once ruled. Yet, amid this resurgence of nature, humanity's legacy lay dormant, waiting for the touch of the future to rekindle the flame of knowledge. The books, carefully preserved in their protective covers, remained intact, their pages filled with the wisdom and experience of a vanished civilization. Decades turned into centuries, and the world continued its slow, steady transformation. The vaults housing the books stood as silent guardians, their contents shielded from the ravages of time by advanced chemical compounds developed long ago. The pages, though untouched, remained unscathed, sealed away from the elements, ensuring that the knowledge within would endure. But the question remains, will anyone ever find them? Will another civilization, another intelligent species, rise from the ashes of humanity and discover the legacy left behind? Or will the books remain sealed forever, a testament to a species that once existed but is now lost to time? In the stillness of a world without humanity, the books wait, their silent vigil unbroken, as nature reclaims its dominion. Whether their stories will be read again or remain forever hidden, only time will tell.